Hello, everyone. It is so nice to be with you tonight and to talk about the new FAFSA, which will be released shortly. So, with that, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk a little bit about what financial aid is, and we're going to go through the processes of setting up a student aid account, filing the FAFSA, what happens after the FAFSA, and interwoven into all of that is going to be updates and new information related to the FAFSA, with the hope that those of you who have done it before will know what's different, and those of you who have never done it will know what to expect. Then we'll talk a little bit about, what if your circumstances have changed, and we'll share some additional resources. So just to start with a really basic high-level overview of financial aid is really any money that's available to help pay for higher education. And we really think of financial aid as breaking into two broad categories, the first being merit aid and the other being need-based aid. So merit aid is the type of aid that students might be eligible to receive based on who they are as an individual. So the most common type of merit aid is aid that's based maybe from the admissions office or awarded by the admissions office. So a student in their admissions application, they're really strong academically, and the admissions office says, we really want you, and so they offer the student a merit scholarship. Another type of merit scholarship is an athletic scholarship. There are some students that receive a scholarship specifically because of their ability to play a sport, and that's awarded by the athletic office. That's merit scholarship. And then there might be other things that schools are looking for. My oldest son was not a music major, but his roommate was, and the school really valued that. And so they gave him an award just because he was a great trombone player. So those are all examples of merit aid. That's actually not going to be our focus tonight, but merit aid is really important. So I wanted to be sure that you know that some schools, but not all, have merit aid available. And it's really important as your students are looking at different schools to ask the question, do you have merit aid? What type of merit aid do you have? And how do I apply for it? Our focus is going to be on need-based aid. So need-based aid is the type of aid that's awarded by the financial aid office specifically, and it's based on the family's theoretical ability to pay for college. And when I say college, I mean 2-year, 4-year, all those different types of programs. So what the vast majority of schools use to determine eligibility for all types of aid is the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. So we're going to focus on this tonight. Every single school has to use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal financial aid, every school. All Maine schools use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for the Maine State Grant, and most schools in Maine use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for their own institutional money. I do want to say if you have a child looking at Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby, or looking at schools out of state, I do want you to follow up and check their school's website to see if they require something called the CSS profile. Some schools, typically schools with a lot of money, in addition to the FAFSA, need you to file the CSS profile because that's what they're going to use to determine eligibility for their own institutional money. But if your student's staying in Maine, not looking at Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby, the FAFSA is the one application that will gain them access to all of those types of financial aid. We do want to be sure that everybody files the FAFSA, even if you didn't think you would qualify or don't think you'd qualify. The FAFSA has changed. More students are going to be eligible. But additionally, even if students are looking at scholarships or are looking to borrow any sort of money, federal student loans are best. And in order to access those, you need to file a FAFSA. So you're here tonight. I'm assuming that you are planning to. I'm happy that you're planning to. And I just really want to encourage everyone to be sure that they get that FAFSA completed. Now, as mentioned, the FAFSA is being completely overhauled. Excuse me, sorry. So it's the most significant overhaul to the FAFSA in the last 40 years. And so even though I've been working in financial aid forever, it has not been 40 years. So this is definitely the most significant thing that we've seen happen in a long time. The FAFSA process has been changed, the form is going to be different, and the formula behind the scenes has also been changed. So everything about the FAFSA is going to be a little bit different. So I think a lot of the changes are really good and positive, though. So let's talk about what some of those changes are going to look like as people go through the process. So first of all, The very first step before people can even file a FAFSA is to create a federal student aid account, which we refer to as an FSA ID. So this is the first step that people need to take. And where you can go to create your federal student aid account is at studentaid.gov. So creating the student aid account, again, creating a username and password that we refer to as an FSA ID, that username and password are what are going to be required to get into the FAFSA. So anyone that needs to access the FAFSA has to have an FSA ID that they can use to sign into the FAFSA, into any federal student aid websites, and it also will serve as your legal signature. So the FAFSA is one of those accounts that you will be using for all sorts of purposes for the upcoming years. So again, when you go to federal student aid, specifically studentaid.gov, and you create your account, what you're going to be doing is setting up a username and password. In the financial aid world, we refer to that username and password as an FSA ID. So you're going to hear a lot of people say, have you gotten your FSA ID yet? And what they mean by that is, have you gone in and created an account and established and set up your username and password? Now, when you are creating your account, you do need to include identifying information, including your social security number. So that is one of those things where I want people to know that when you're ready to create your FSA ID, set up your account, and specifically for students, they do need to have that social security number, and you don't want to guess at it. It needs to be accurate because it is going to be matched with the Social Security Administration. Now, one of the things that you will also need when you set up your account is you're going to need a unique email address. So within the system, the big federal student aid system, all email accounts need to be unique. So if a parent and a student, for example, shared a family email account, they can't both use that email account. They have to use unique email addresses. And an email address is absolutely required this year in order to set up a federal student aid account. For students, there's one other thing I'd like you to be thinking about, which is I don't want you to use your email address at your high school, because what's going to happen is next summer, after you've graduated, your high school email address is going to go away and you won't have access to it any longer. But you will need access to your federal student aid account for a long time to come. So it's really important that if students haven't already, now is the time to set up a Gmail account or a Yahoo account or something like that, so that they can use that account for this purpose. And they'll have it now, they'll have it after high school, they'll have it after college, and they'll be really glad that they did. Also, when you set up your federal student aid account, it is helpful to provide your mobile phone number. That is not required, but strongly recommended, because this is going to be needed for years to come. If people forget their username or password and you need to retrieve them or reset them, having multiple ways of proving that you're you so you can get back into your account is really important. Those being having access to an email or a phone number or things like that. So who needs an FSA ID? An FSA ID, again, is required by anyone who needs to access the FAFSA. So every single student needs to have an FSA ID because every single student needs to get into the FAFSA. Keep in mind, just like when applying for admission, when students are applying for financial aid, the student is the applicant. So the student is the individual that's applying for financial aid. Often they need to provide parent information, but the student is the applicant. So every single student is going to need to complete a FAFSA. If the student is considered a dependent student, then that means that their parent is likely going to have to provide some information on the FAFSA. And we're going to talk in a moment about exactly who is considered a parent for the purposes of the FAFSA. But whoever's identified as a parent who needs to provide information on the FAFSA, that parent is also going to need their own individual FSA ID. So keep in mind that an individual can only have one FSA ID. So I have multiple Apple accounts because I have multiple email addresses, but because that FSA ID is tied to your social security number, you can only have one FSA ID. So that's why we want people, when they set them up, to be very careful. There's a form that will email to you that you can use to keep track of your information, because you can't just create a new one. You have to unravel the one that you have. So that also means that if you're a parent out there who already has an FSA ID, either because you went to school since 2015 or because you have older children who did a FAFSA, and as a parent you needed to get an FSA ID in the last several years, you're going to use that same FSA ID because, again, everyone can only have one. That one is tied to you specifically, and you will use it for any purpose federal student aid related, whether you're the applicant or you're the parent. So again, if you need to create an account, you're going to go to studentaid.gov and create an account. If you think you have an account, but you're not sure you have an account, or you can't remember what your username and password are, then you can go to the same place, studentaid.gov, and try to log in, and you'll be granted the option to retrieve your username or reset your password. And sometimes when people say, well, I did go to school, but I don't know if I had an FSA ID, it's helpful sometimes to know that FSA IDs first became available in May of 2015. Okay, so no one has an FSA ID from prior to May of 2015. So a couple more things on FSA IDs. So what we need to do is we need to figure out for parents which parents need to have an FSA ID. So I'm going to run through these three scenarios, and I'm hoping that all of you out there in the audience can say, okay, I see what my scenario is, and I know who needs to have an FSA ID. One of the new terms that the FAFSA is using is contributor. And so what I want people to know that if you see the term contributor and you're referred to as a contributor, it simply means that you are contributing information. It does not mean that you are required to contribute money. No one can make you pay for any of your students' education. I mean, that's totally up to you to make that decision. So contributor simply means an individual that has to provide information on the FAFSA. So who were the parent contributors? If parents are married to each other, I'm talking about the biological or adoptive parents, if they're married to each other, and in 2022, that's the critical tax year for the FAFSA that we're going to be filing shortly. So if they're married and filed a joint tax return in 2022, then information for both parents will be required on the FAFSA, but only one parent will need an FSA ID. And that is because what's going to happen when you're in the FAFSA is you're going to have the ability to retrieve information from the IRS. So the information you provide on the FAFSA with your permission is going to be used to contact the IRS, grab your tax information, and have it transferred back into the FAFSA, which is going to make the FAFSA so much easier to complete. So if you're married and you filed joint taxes, then either of the parents can grant consent to have their tax information used. They don't both have to do it separately. So in my case, I'm married. We filed a joint tax return. So if I'm doing a FAFSA for our kiddos, then only I need to have an FSA ID, because when I get to that section where they're going to ask me about my income information, I'm going to be able to grant that that's okay to go grab it. I'm going to grant what they call consent and approval, and I can do that on behalf of my husband. If parents are married, but in 2022, they filed taxes separately, which I read the other day that 10% of families, married couples, filed their taxes separately. Or if parents live together but aren't married, so therefore they cannot file a joint tax return, then information for both parents will be required, and both parents are going to need their own FSA ID. So in that case, again, where parents are married but file separate tax returns, both parents will need their own FSA ID so that they can go into the FAFSA and they can grant permission for their IRS information to be transferred into the FAFSA. The third scenario is a case where parents are divorced, separated, or never married and don't live in the same household. So this one's a two-step process. The first thing we have to figure out which parent is the parent on the FAFSA. Because in the case of, let's say, a divorce situation, only one of the biological parents is going to be on the FAFSA. Okay? So how we determine which parent is going to be on the FAFSA is we need to figure out which parent provided the most financial support in the last 12 months. Whichever parent provided the most financial support, that is going to be the parent on the FAFSA. So let's say, for example, I'm the student, my parents are divorced. My mother provides 70% of my financial support. My dad provides about 30%. have a relationship with him. He does support me to some extent. But even though that's the case, because mom provides the majority of the support, she is going to be the parent on the FAFSA. And believe it or not, dad is not going to be on the FAFSA at all and doesn't have to provide any parent information. So he doesn't need to worry about this a bit. Now, the next step, though, is once I've identified that mom is the parent on the FAFSA, then I have to figure out what mom's marital status is on the day the FAFSA is filed. So on the day the FAFSA is filed, mom is married, then we need mom's spouse's information on the FAFSA as well. Okay, and I know people don't love that. Um, whether or not that spouse needs to have their own FSA ID comes down to whether or not they filed a joint tax return in 2022. So let's just say mom got married over the summer. Even though people don't like it, the spouse's information does need to be on the FAFSA. All their income information will count. And if they were just married over the summer, there's no way in 2022 they filed the joint tax return. So that would mean mom's spouse would also need to get their own FSA ID. One more slide about FSA IDs. So when can you create them? You can create them now. And I am hoping that maybe some of you already have one, either because of past years or you've already done it sometime this fall because you've heard about the need to get these done. Again, you're going to go to studentaid.gov to create those accounts. And the reason that we want you to get it done now, even though the FAFSA is not available yet, is because an FSA ID has to be matched with the Social Security Administration. Keep in mind that that FSA ID is going to allow your income information to be transferred into a FAFSA. So for security purposes, the federal government is saying, hey, we need to be sure that you're you. And so when you provide your information, when you set up your federal student aid account, you're providing your identifying information, including your Social Security number, as we talked about, and that is matched with the Social Security Administration. That does take a couple of days, so we're recommending that everyone create their FSA ID at least a week before filing the FAFSA, because you can't use your FSA ID until it's been matched, and we want to be sure that you have sufficient time to do that before the FAFSA becomes available. So with that said, let me take a peek at some of these questions, okay? So I just have a question in general about filing the FAFSA. The benefit of filing the FAFSA is it opens you up to being considered for federal aid, state aid, aid from the school itself. It also is a requirement of many scholarship organizations like the Worthington Scholarship, if you've heard about that. Everyone should be investigating the Worthington Scholarship because it's a fabulous scholarship that's available to many, many students. And if people are going to need to borrow any money, federal student loans are best. But in order to be eligible for a federal student loan, the student does have to file a FAFSA. So there's really no downside to filing the FAFSA. So I want to be sure that absolutely everyone does it because that is what will open you up to be considered for all of these various types of aid. One form does a lot. Okay, so I think this one came in before we kind of got through the slides, but if you have already done a FAFSA in the past, then yes, if you already created an FSA ID in the past, you will use that same username and password to get into the FAFSA. You are not creating a new one. Even though the FAFSA is being overhauled, there's no overhaul of FSA IDs. FSA IDs that have been used, in the last several years are the same FSA IDs you're going to use on this FAFSA. The only thing you've got to be sure of is that you know your username and password. So again, you can go to studentaid.gov and try to sign in. And if you can't remember your username and password, you can retrieve and or reset that information. Yes, is the FAFSA used for graduate students? It absolutely is. The only difference with the graduate student is that it only is going to require the student's information, not the parents. If the student is married, their spouse's information will matter as well. I got a question about a student loan acknowledgement form. Yes, those are something that they want students to do every year. So if you want to reach out to me directly about the loan acknowledgement form, we can certainly talk more about that one. Okay, so hopefully people know who needs an FSA ID, where you go to create an FSA ID, and the need to get it created before the FAFSA comes out, which is different than in the past. In the past, what you used to be able to do is create an FSA ID and use it immediately to file the FAFSA, but now it's really become a two-step process. So getting that all completed before the FAFSA becomes available means that you're going to be ready to go. So the 2024-25 FAFSA is what you're going to be filing for financial aid for the next academic year. So when we talk about the year of the FAFSA, it's going to be the year in which the student needs that financial aid. So if I've got people who are parents of high school seniors, your student's going to graduate, in June of 2024. So they need financial aid for the 24-25 academic year. And the reason I make a big deal about this is because there are often 2 years of FAFSAs out there. So keep in mind when you're filling out a FAFSA, this year will be easy because there's only going to be one on the new site. But going forward, it's always the year in which you need the financial aid. That's the FAFSA you want to do. And the FAFSA lives at studentaid.gov as well, which it wasn't always as obvious in the past. So when you log into studentaid.gov, and this is what it's going to look like when the new form is rolled out, you're going to see that you can log in to your account, you can create an account, and the dashboard is still set up this way now. The picture just looks different. And when it's time to file the FAFSA, you're just going to click here to file the FAFSA. So I would recommend, if you haven't already, going to studentaid.gov and bookmarking it, because it's the site you're going to return to for all sorts of different reasons related to financial aid for the next several years. The 24-25 FAFSA will be released by December 31st, so later this month. We know it will be out by December 31st. What we don't know is exactly the release date. It could be a little bit earlier. What we're hearing very much through the grapevine is that there might be a soft launch of it, so that they might very quietly release it. And some people might find it with the official release date being the 31st. Normally, in a non-overhaul year, the FAFSA becomes available on October 1st every year. And so going forward, remember that a student does have to file a FAFSA every single year. This is not like the admissions process where it's a one-time and you're done. If you stay at the same school, you have to file every single year. Normally, it's available starting October 1st, and it will return to October 1st next year. So when should you file? So I talked about the fact that it will be out by the 31st of December. Here's my recommendation. I wouldn't do it the day it comes out. I, for matter of fact, would give it a couple of days, maybe even a week after it comes out before you go ahead and try to file the FAFSA. This is actually advice that I normally give, even if the FAFSA has not been overhauled and is available on October 1st. I'll often say wait a couple of days just because the system is going to be really busy. Additionally, this year, it's been completely overhauled. So, like with any new product, there might be a few little hitches here and there. Give them a couple days to kind of work out any of those little glitches. And I think you'll find it will be a better experience if you're able to do that. Always check with your school's priority filing date, by the date by which you need to have the FAFSA filed. But in Maine, the vast majority of schools, it's not till March 1st. There's one school where it's USM, they want it by February 15th, but you've got plenty of time as long as you get it done in the month of January, okay? Now, here's one of the things that's going to be different about the FAFSA. So for those of you who have done a FAFSA previously, you're going to feel the difference in the process. And it's because the FAFSA has become a roles-based form. And what I mean by that, instead of one application where the student, provides some information and then the parents ask some questions within one form, which is how it used to be, now what it's going to be is there's going to be two segments of the FAFSA. For dependent students, there's going to be a student section that the student will log into, and the student will only see questions relevant to the student. Then the parent will log into the parent section, and they will only see questions that are relevant to the parents, okay? Now, what has to happen, though, is that these two sections need to be connected together. So I think you're going to really like the fact that each section is going to be shorter and easier to complete. But you will need to be able to connect these two. And how that's going to happen is that either the student or parent can start the FAFSA, but whoever starts it is going to invite the other party to complete their section of the FAFSA. So within the FAFSA form, let's just say it's the student that starts the FAFSA. They'll get a couple of screens in, and then they're going to be asked to invite their parent. It's going to help them identify who might be a parent, like in a divorce situation. And then once they figured out who, they're going to invite that parent. Now, when they do that, they're going to provide the parent's legal name, date of birth, and social security number, as well as an email address. The name, date of birth, and social security number have to match what was in the FSA ID for the parent and have to match, therefore, what's in this with the Social Security Administration, because it's going to be that invitation that is going to end up linking the student section with the parent section. So the big takeaway that I have for all of you is I just want you to give some thought as to who should start the FAFSA. I'm going to tell you that I think that oftentimes what's going to make the most sense is for the parent to start the FAFSA because of the need to provide that social security number. Parents probably have their student social security number. It's going to be a lot easier for them to provide it. On the other hand, if a parent is fine with giving the student their social security number, the student can start it. Either way, that's fine. It's just that the other party has to invite them. Now, when I say that they've got to invite the other party, again, they're going to put in some information. An email is going to be sent virtually immediately. So here's my best case scenario, if you think you can make it happen. My best case scenario is that student and parent are sitting together, ideally at the same table, and ideally they both have their own device that they're working on. One of them will start it. They will invite the other, and immediately the other will be invited, and then the other person can go in and can be completing their section simultaneously. So again, if the student starts the FAFSA, they invite the parent will get that email, they will click on a link, or they can go directly to studentaid.gov and see the link. And then they can enter the FAFSA, so the student can be doing their section, the parent can be doing their section simultaneously, and then when they're both done, they can go ahead and submit the FAFSA. So that's, I think, the ideal. But if the student does their section and then the next day the parent does theirs, that works fine too. Okay. So let me do one more slide here, and I see I've got a question. Let me do one more slide and I'll then look at that question. Okay. So when filing the 24-25 FAFSA, as mentioned, it does require 2022 income information. That is the year of the FAFSA that is going to be used to determine eligibility on this FAFSA. Now, I know that seems like it was a little bit ago, right? Why are we using information from 2022? And the reason is because they want to use a tax information that's already been processed. Believe it or not, there was a period of time where what we would do is we would estimate our income and then go back in and update it to reflect the actual income once we filed our taxes. So that was just really onerous and no fun. So what they did is they said, you know what, we're going to kind of, find the middle of the road here. We're going to use information that's a little bit older, but it's going to make it so much easier. And there is a process if your income information has changed that I'll touch on in just a moment. So what's going to happen is when the parents are in the parent section, and when the student is in the student section, that they will be asked about income stuff. And what's going to happen is they're going to be asked if they're willing to provide consent and approval to allow their information to be transferred from the IRS. Okay. Everybody needs to say yes to this, because what happens if you say that you won't approve of this, then the student is ineligible for federal student aid. So there's some things in financial aid that are black and white, and there's some things that are kind of gray. This is a black and white. The only way that a student is eligible for federal student aid is if the student says yes to provide consent and approval, and the parent also provides consent and approval. And that includes non-tax filers. So students might think, well, my goodness, I didn't file taxes in 2022. I must not need to do this piece. No, even people who haven't filed taxes for that year still have to provide consent and approval, because what comes back is the documentation that there isn't a tax return on file for them, and that is critical. Even people who filed a foreign tax return still have to provide consent and approval. Okay, so everybody has to provide consent and approval. They make it nice and clear in the screenshots that we've seen. You're not going to miss this by accident. And let's just say for some reason someone didn't provide consent and approval, you can come back in later and provide that consent and approval. But let's just, everyone, right from the get-go, be sure that you do that. Let me address one more thing, and then we'll go ahead and I'll look at the questions because I've seen several have come in the last minute or so. So there's no doubt that income is the biggest driver of financial aid eligibility. Asset information can play a role, but asset information has never had anywhere near the impact on financial aid eligibility, excuse me, that income has. But this year, I have a real treat for a lot of you. So there are situations in which families don't have to provide asset information. And that's typically if their income is below a certain amount. It's also if they receive any federally means tested benefits. So if people receive SNAP or WIC or a housing subsidy, earned income credit, things of that nature, main care, then they are exempt from having to provide any asset information. Well, one of the means tested benefits is free and reduced lunch. And I understand that behind the scenes, free and reduced lunch is some state money, but it's also some federal money. So it is considered a federally means tested benefit. The scenario we have right now in Maine is that every public school student is eligible for free and reduced lunch. And we are one of 7 states where this is the case. And as a result, because students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, you can say yes to that question. So in that federally means tested block where it asks you, do you or anyone in your family receive any of these federally means tested benefits? Every single one of you that has a public school student should check yes to that box. By virtue of doing that, you are not going to have to provide any asset information this year, not students and not parents. So this is like an early holiday gift, okay? It might only be for 1 year. I would not be shocked if next year they take off the free and reduced option off of the federally means tested list of things that make it you exempt from providing asset information. But for this year, it's there. The guidance from the U.S. Department of Education is if you are in the situation that we are here in Maine, all public school students eligible for free and reduced lunch, check that box and you'll be exempt from providing assets. Okay, might not be that way next year, but do it for this year. So I'm going to take a pause here and look at some of the questions that have come up. So it is free and reduced lunch for anyone in the household. So the question is free and reduced lunch for high school seniors only. I will have a junior in college. So what you want to think about is anyone in your household receiving any of the federally means tested benefits. Okay. So if you have younger children that are in public school and receiving this benefit or any of the other federally means tested benefits, then that would allow you to be exempt from having to provide asset information. If no one in your family receives any of those federally means tested benefits, then there is the income cutoff. And if most families earning less than 60,000, it depends on tax schedules, but most families that earned under 60,000 in 2022 are also exempt from having to provide assets on the FAFSA. So what's going to happen is parents are going to go in, complete their section, students are going to complete their section, vice versa. Again, either one can start the FAFSA, but once the FAFSA is completely done, then the FAFSA is going to be signed electronically with your FSA ID and submitted. Once the FAFSA is submitted, the student will receive, and it's the student, because again, this whole student parent thing we have to get used to as parents, that the communications are going to be to the student specifically. The student will get a confirmation page that will let them know that their FAFSA has been submitted. I would recommend this year, I normally don't, I would recommend this year that you take a screenshot of that, okay? It's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen, but I recommend that you do this year. And that is because this year what's going to happen is that the FAFSA is going to be submitted, but the federal government is not going to begin processing of them immediately. So they're not going to process these records and they're not going to be sending them to the schools, meaning the colleges that were listed on the student's FAFSA, until it looks like the end of January. And I think it's just the reality that they've still got a few things that they're finishing up. So the FAFSA will become available. People will be able to submit the FAFSA. You'll get confirmation in a screenshot, in an email. They download that as a PDF and save it on their computer. Because sometimes scholarship organizations are going to want a copy of that FAFSA submission summary. And so if students save it to their computer, they're going to have it available if that is requested by anyone. Another security provision is that within the FAFSA and on the FAFSA submission summary, income information from the IRS will not actually show. Before a school is going to send a financial aid offer, the student does have to be offered admission. This year, obviously we've got this long period of time where students are applying before they can even do their FAFSA. So they're applying for admission long before they're filing their financial aid. So probably most of them, will have been offered admission by the time the FAFSA is processed. But schools are not going to start sending out financial aid offers until at least February, and I'm going to guess that it's going to be late February at least for the vast majority of schools. And that's because if schools don't start getting records until the end of January, they've still got to load those records, test those records, come up with their award parameters. It's a new formula, and then actually do financial aid awarding and send out those financial aid offers. So it is absolutely going to be a case this year of hurry up and get your FAFSA done, which is why I'm saying you don't need to hurry as much, but get your FAFSA done in January and then waiting for a bit before you know what's going to be coming in terms of the financial aid offer. Many schools do send a paper letter that first year, but they'll very quickly transition to only notifying the student via email. Some schools, right from the get-go, they're only going to communicate via email. So it's a really good idea for students as they're being offered admission to make sure they set up their email account with every school that they've been accepted to and are still interested in, and then that they check their student portal on a regular basis. So when a school does do the financial aid offer, they're going to send an email to the student. It's not going to include the actual offer. Instead, what it's going to say is go check out your student portal. So the student portal is just going to house all of that information electronically. If any of your students are looking at the UMaine system schools, they refer to their portal as Main Street, and that's where you're going to find everything from the admissions information, the financial aid information, the class registration, transcript information, the bill, all of that lives in the portal. So what I would recommend is, once we get into early February, or maybe I'm actually going to say late February, mid-late February, just start checking the student portal to see if you can see any financial aid activity, because that's where you're going to see it first. So set up those email accounts, get familiar with that portal, and then start checking that maybe mid-February for additional information. Once you get financial aid offers, you're going to want to compare them. It's really challenging to compare financial aid offers just by looking at them because every one looks a little bit different. So we've put together a form that you can use, or any sort of pencil and paper will work as well. But what I want all of you to do before you commit to a school is to, say, okay, what is this school actually costing us? The cost of the school, direct costs, tuition fees, room and board are what I would focus on, and then subtract out any grants and scholarships. Those are the funds that don't have to be repaid. If you take the total direct costs minus grants and scholarships, that's going to give you what we refer to as the net cost. Okay, that's the cost before any loans. So what you want to do is you want to do that for school A, for school B, and for school C. So when you've done that, what you can see is right across the line, what is that net cost at each of those schools? Because what you might find is sometimes a more expensive school will offer better financial aid and actually be more affordable, but not always. So using a form like this will help you figure that out. So I would love to have you do a form like this so that you kind of know what's coming once you decide on the school, what's going to be coming as an estimated bill in the summer, but also so you're really sure as you're making your decision what each school is going to cost if you end up selecting that. I am not someone who believes that you should always select the least expensive school. I think fit and having the student be successful and being able to graduate is incredibly important. But at the same time, I don't think there's any way most of us cannot have cost factor in to some extent. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that if your financial situation has changed, there's a way you can deal with that. So if you are filing the FAFSA and you're thinking, this is no longer my situation, then what you want to do is you want to reach out to the school, each of the schools that you're still looking at, and let them know that you have what are called special circumstances. So that could be that your income is different. It could be that after the FAFSA is filed, there's a divorce or separation, or God forbid, a passing of a parent. It could be that you have expenses that don't show up on the FAFSA. Like for example, you have really high medical expenses and the FAFSA takes into account, some medical expenses, but it uses it just a general percentage. If yours are really significant, you'd want to let them know that. If you are a parent who has multiple kids in college, you want to reach out to the college if having multiple kids in college and paying for multiple kids, paying tuition and all of that for multiple kids, you want to reach out to them and let them know that, and give them the opportunity to, gather some information from you and then see if they can make an adjustment to award some additional financial aid. We do have a variety of resources available at famemaine.com on our website. We'd love to have you check those out. I'll send a few of them along for the email that you'll be receiving. But we do have informational videos, tools, calculators, other types of publications. We will be offering FAFSA help specifically. So on the events page, you're going to be seeing where we are going to be offering sessions starting in mid-January through February. That will be on our events page. We have a scholarship search. We have all sorts of information on financial wellness because no matter what people end up doing, having that knowledge of money and how it works and all of that is important. If you want to stay connected with us after tonight, then I would love to have you sign up for emails or texts or both. For text, you can simply opt in by texting FAME at 207-707-5001. Or you can go to famemaine.com/join. At famemaine.com/join, you can join our email list. You can do that if you're a student, you can do it if you're a parent, but it's also where it has that phone number again. So as I move to the next slide, if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, just go ahead and go to famemaine.com/join, and you can sign up for either of those things. We will not drive you crazy, I promise you. We only send periodic emails and texts, and they're going to be only when things are really important. So we will, once the FAFSA has launched, we will let you know that if you want to sign up for that. We'll provide tips and hints as to what we're learning as we go through the process. Come March or, so we'll send out a link to that financial aid offer comparison worksheet. Those are the sort of emails we send. You're not going to get one and text. You're not going to get one from us on a regular, daily basis. No way, not even a weekly basis, unless there's a couple of, a period of time where a lot's happening. And we really, really want you to know that. But typically maybe 2 a month. You can also sign up for our Facebook group. You can go to Facebook and look for Paying for College for Me, and we'd love to have you sign up to join that group. And we do offer free financial aid coaching. So if you go to our contact page, you can find a link where you can sign up for a Zoom appointment. We offer 30-minute Zoom appointments all year long, different days of the week, different times of day. Weekdays. And so if you're ever interested in doing that, we'll talk about whatever you want to, whether it's applying for aid, comparing offers, paying the rest of the bill. We're here and available to help with that. So basically that's what I have. I do have this slide just to reiterate that you need to create your FSA IDs if you haven't already. The information that you will need is listed there. We've kind of talked about it already. You'll create a username and password, but you will also select an answer for challenge questions. You'll verify your email address and your mobile phone number if you provide one. You're probably pretty familiar with how that verification process happens. You'll be sent a text that will have a code that you'll have to enter into the website, and then you'll be sent an email with a different code that you'll have to enter into the website. That's how they're confirming and verifying that you are you. Don't be surprised that going forward, anytime someone uses their FSA ID, whether it's to get into the student aid site to file the FAFSA or to do anything loan related going forward, every single time now, you're going to have to do two-factor authentication. So whenever you're doing anything related to this, make sure you're in a place where you've got cell service, which might seem obvious, but make sure you're in a place where you have cell service if you want to get that code via text, or you have email access if you want to get it via email. So that federal FSA ID worksheet, I will send that along, so you'll have a copy of that. You can use it if you would like. All right. So question here, that will the new calculation of how much families can pay still include the fact that multiple children are in college at the same time? No, it does not, which is why if you do have multiple children in college, you want to contact the schools if you're paying for them. So let's just say, for example, if you had two kids in college, but one of those students was going to the community college, and right now, they're not having to, there's free community college. And so if you weren't paying for them, then they're not going to make an adjustment. But if you have two kids that you're helping to put through college and you're paying for them, then yes, please, please, please follow up with schools. They're expecting that people will be following up with them, and asking for a reconsideration, basically for their circumstances. I know a lot of people are wondering why did that go away? One of the things, not to go into the weeds too much, but one of the good things about the new FAFSA, the new better FAFSA, is that federal Pell Grant eligibility has been expanded. And it's also become more transparent, meaning that people can determine whether or not they're eligible for a Pell Grant even before they file the FAFSA, a maximum Pell or minimum Pell. And how they can do that is they can do it using the federal poverty tables. So in some cases, people can have incomes up to 275%, 325%, even 400% of the poverty levels, and be eligible for a Pell Grant. And they can know that ahead of time, which I think is a really, really good, important thing. To determine that, they just simply need to know their marital status, their family size, and their income, because that's what's in the poverty tables. What's not in the poverty tables is number of people in college. So in order to make the Pell Grant more transparent, to be able to use these poverty tables as a way of determining Pell Grant eligibility, they had to remove the number in college from the FAFSA formula. Now, you are going to see that question on the FAFSA. It is still going to ask you, how many children do you have in college? So it's not that Milo's gotten this wrong, and you think, why? She told me it wasn't going to be there. Yeah, the question is going to be there, but schools will find that it's not going to impact financial aid eligibility, federal money. And so schools can, again, they can take that into account for their own money, which it's why it's still there. But unless you reach out to the school, there's no way that it's going to impact federal or state financial aid. So I hope that makes sense and is more clear. Our website will have up-to-date information once the FAFSA is released, and we will be providing some additional guidance as we learn more. So, at this point, we need to have some actual experience with it too, but I have no doubt we'll be creating a tips and hints sort of thing. The best way for people to get that information, is to sign up to get texts or emails, because that means that we're automatically going to send them that information. Federal Student Aid will absolutely be doing a campaign of some sort themselves. I'm sure there will be a big announcement at some point. Those families who have filed FAFSAs in the past will be hearing from Federal Student Aid. If they haven't filed before, Federal Student Aid doesn't know who they are, but certainly parents who have filed in the past. I think this will get a lot of press coverage in the month of January as well. But I really do encourage you just to, stay in touch with us, and we'll do our absolute best to keep people as up to speed as all of this reveals itself. There is a question about, does the SAI take into account whether or not the parent or their spouses still are paying student loans themselves? So
Good question.
that's a great question. And no, the formula didn't take that into account previously, and it does not now. But just like I was talking about, if you have medical expenses, or you have multiple kids in college, another reason to reach out to the financial aid office is to let them know if you're still paying back federal student loans. Because if you are, they can take that into account. So like when I used to work in the financial aid office years ago, what we would do is if a parent was making X number of dollars of student loan payments, we'd know that money wasn't available, obviously, to help pay for their child's education. So an adjustment could be made to reflect that. So anyone in that situation, really important. I really, really want you to reach out to your school or schools and let them know that that's the case, given the opportunity to make an adjustment and to review the situation.